Like Moss.
Wherever you are, make it Truth Frequency Radio.
Welcome to I Protest. This is Don Jeffries. I have a great guest. I'm very honored to have Dr. Jerome Corsi with us for the first hour. Dr. Corsi is a well-known name to, I think, most Americans. He's written more books than I can name, but he has the New York Times bestsellers Unfit for Command and The Abomination. Other books include Where's the Birth Certificate and Who Really Killed Kennedy. Just an all-around astute individual. Dr. Corsi, welcome to the show.
Well, great to be with you, Don. I've got a couple of your books here, too. Hidden History and Survival of the Richest. They're right here on my bookshelves.
Oh, that's almost surrealistic to hear that. It's wonderful to know that people like you are actually reading and you've written blurbs. Just kind of full disclosure here, you've written blurbs for all my books. I think you're the first one who's written a blurb for the new book that's coming out in May, The Crimes and Cover-Ups in American Politics, 1776 and 1963. So obviously, I very much appreciate that.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing that one and reading it in full. It should be a great book.
I hope so. I hope people get something out of it. You know, it's harder. Those of us that write history now, it's harder and harder to do because I think Americans are generally historically illiterate. Most Americans just don't know history.
It's unfortunate, but I think you're right, and I've been fighting that battle as you have been for years, and I sure would like to see our colleges returning, especially to teaching American history and the history of especially the Revolutionary War, the Civil War. We've had great history. The fight for freedom has been paid for with the lives and blood of a lot of patriots, and we're creating a generation that is largely ignorant of the debt they owe to others who preceded us for the freedom that allows them to today, I think, begin to embrace socialism, which I'm beginning to realize this is one of the things I'm worried about most in, the future of this country.
Yeah, well, I think I don't think it's any accident that Hollywood has paid very little notice to the founding fathers. Even going back as far, I've written about that before. There's not a single biopic, even back when Hollywood was generally considered patriotic, about George Washington, about Thomas Jefferson. None of the founding fathers, other than Alexander Hamilton, who was the banker's favorite founding father, and now is a hip black guy on Broadway, I guess. But back then, so I think it's because they don't want to talk about the founding of this country, because if they do, what is the founding of this country based on? We were throwing off tyranny, and a tyranny that is maybe 1/1000th of the tyranny we experience today under our own government.
Well, I'm finding this. I really enjoyed your bumper music there. Won't back down.
Yeah.
Because I think that's exactly the situation I'm in right now with Mueller.
Yes.
I won't back down, and we'll beat him because I've done nothing wrong. But this is an investigation which is politically motivated. It shows unequal justice. It's clearly demonstrates that our Justice Department is in the hands of politically motivated criminals who will go to the extent of using criminal prosecutorial misconduct, in order to put someone like myself, an innocent person who's I'm 72 years old, I've never committed a crime. I don't have as much as a parking ticket to my record until I met Mueller. And now because they hate my writing, going back to Unfit for Command, which I co-authored with John O'Neill, the Swift book against John Kerry, I'm suddenly one of their major criminals.
Yeah, well, it's incredible, and people like, I consider myself an independent. I guess you're labeled more of a right winger, but I consider you to be pretty independent. So certainly, you wrote a nice blurb about survival of the richest, which generally is probably as far left as it can get in many ways. But I think you're outside that right-left paradigm, and I hope I am too. And I wondered how much you could talk about the Mueller probe, because you're in the news a lot lately, and I've read that you're going to be suing Mueller for $350,000, and you refused to plea deal. How much can you talk about that?
I can say I'm willing to talk about every single aspect of it.
Wonderful.
Ask me any question you want to ask me, and I'm intent on exposing Mueller. I know that they are desperate to put me into prison and shut me up, and they're going to have a hard time doing that.
But what is, other than this fantasy about the Russians, which is the stupidest and really the only official state-conceived conspiracy theory I've ever heard of, and the most preposterous one as well, the idea that with all the electoral corruption we've had going back to vote scam that the late Collier brothers wrote about back in the 80s, we've certainly exposed tons of voting fraud going back to landslide Lyndon Johnson, even farther back than that. The idea that the Russians are responsible for some kind of voting fraud is ridiculous, and now they're trying to ensnare. If you're guilty of anything, all I can see is that, are they trying to say you're guilty because you supported Trump? Roger Stone supported Trump. What can they possibly charge you with? I don't get it.
I think my two big crimes, and I've said this, are number one, I supported and do support Donald Trump, and two, I believe in Jesus Christ, my Lord and Savior. Now, coming from Harvard, that makes me some kind of criminal that I didn't take the indoctrination, I didn't take the atheism indoctrination program, and wasn't converted to their way of thinking. But the point is, this idea that, Mueller has indicted two groups of Russians, some 12 or 15 people in each group, and Southern District of New York has just indicted this Russian lawyer, none of whom are going to come to the United States to face trial. So these are all just show indictments under the assumption the American people are so dumbed down they don't know the difference between an indictment and a conviction.
Yeah,
which proved nothing.
Right.
And in fact, even when Rod Rosenstein introduced these indictments from the Justice Department at a press conference, he was forced to admit that the Justice Department could not prove that any of the posts these supposed Russian operatives had on social media made any difference at all in the election. And it's ridiculous. It's a preposterous. It stems also from the idea that Russia stole the emails out of the Democratic National Convention. I spent, and I tried to convince the special prosecutor that wasn't the case. They weren't interested. I think I can prove that Russia did not steal those emails. At any rate, I spent 40 hours. I was subpoenaed to the Mueller grand jury on August 28th, 2018, just a few months ago. And I spent 40 hours with Mueller over 6 sessions, and that was 2 months. And it was grueling. I went in to cooperate. I brought in with me the laptop computers that I had been using during 2016 until currently. I brought in the backup external hard drive, which had a time machine application backing that computer up constantly, so nothing could be permanently erased. It was still in the backup system. I gave them my cell phones. I gave them my various email accounts, username, password, anything they wanted. Authorized them to go get my phone records. Verizon wouldn't even give me my phone call records. They don't give you phone bills that list the calls anymore. They just give you summary phone bills. At any rate, I went in and in the first hour, in asking me a question in which I'd forgotten 2 emails, here I am in a small conference room in an unmarked FBI building in southeast Washington, D.C., no windows, no clock, observation bulb up here so some guys in another room could be watching us, 3 of the prosecutors from Mueller's team, 6 to 9 FBI, all facing us across the table, and me and my attorney, David Gray. And so they begin questioning us, and I forgot an email or two I said I didn't want anybody to go see Julian Assange. And they said, well, Dr. Corsi, we have this email here in July 2016 that proves you are lying. I said, wait a minute. They show it to me, finally. And I said, that was an email that Roger Stone sent me in July 2016. Said somebody basically should go see Assange. I forwarded it to Ted Malloch. I said, Ted from Roger, Jerry. It took me about 20 seconds to do that. I never thought that Malloch would go to see Assange. I'm confident he did not. I forgot about the email. And this, of course, they all walk out of the room, and now I'm going to go to prison the rest of my life for lying. So wait a minute. The crime is that I knowingly and willfully gave to the special counselor and the FBI information I knew to be false with the intent to deceive them. I did not do that. I forgot a few emails. Now, they allowed me to amend the testimony. I had not downloaded my 2016 emails. It's a complicated story, but I didn't want to completely blow up the 17-inch laptop that I had been using from a Mac Pro. It was about dead. It did die, actually, during the investigation. I can't even get it to run anymore. At any rate, when I looked at the emails, I found this one, and I amended the testimony. Well, it all blew up at the end of 40 hours because I couldn't give them a link to Assange to connect for Roger Stone, because I don't know Assange. I've never spoken to Assange. I've never had any communication with him or WikiLeaks, directly or indirectly. I don't have any source who gave me the information about what Assange had, and they don't believe this. They wanted me to plead guilty to the first day's memory mistake, not acknowledging that I had amended that testimony.
But just look at the misdirection here. Because really, as far as I can determine, this entire Russiagate nonsense began with the very real emails from the DNC, which exposed real corruption on the part of the DNC in stealing the nomination from Bernie Sanders for Hillary Clinton. Somehow, the mainstream media, our awful Pravda TASS media we have, the state-sanctioned media, has managed to turn that into a story where Russia somehow stole the election away from Hillary Clinton. Bernie Sanders has lost. Bernie Sanders buys the collusion. He didn't complain then. Donald Trump complained a little, but not him. How have they, not only that, and you had the death of Seth Rich, where Julian Assange has basically all but named him as the source of the person who leaked it. He dies mysteriously. Even Seth's rich family doesn't want that investigated. How did all this get twisted so where they're now so desperate? They're trying to go after people like you and Roger Stone, who have no real connection to the Trump campaign at all, other than that you supported him generally. I guess you've known him basically in some capacity, but you're not any kind of representative of the Trump administration. This is ludicrous, this whole thing.
Yeah, in another era, it would be pathetic. It would be ludicrous. But our government has become the George III that our founding fathers rebelled against on steroids, with surveillance capabilities that are beyond imagination. Most people have no idea of the constant surveillance they're under, whether they've done anything or not. And when we get face recognition technology, they're going to be able to record virtually every moment of your life, putting devices in your home, which can, including our laptops and smart TVs, which can record what we're doing and watch us. They're going to be able to do a Truman Show. Every moment of your life is going to be able to be replayed for you if the state decides that your social acceptance score isn't high enough because you disagree with the regime. And the media has become more of a lapdog media, government controlled through Operation Mockingbird type payments from the CIA and other more subtle means of influence, that it's become worse than George Orwell 1984. I mean, part of why I get called a conspiracy theorist all the time, and I explain, is I don't accept government explanations. Yep. If the government is saying something, my first assumption is they're lying. Yeah. And I want to know why they're lying, because I'm assuming they're lying.
Yeah. Well, the idea is basically, I mean, everything I've ever written, I'm not theorizing at all. I mean, we're just talking about, this is the narrative that's being set out to you in virtually every important event. And the narrative is always absurd. it falls apart on the least bit of investigation. If we had real so-called Woodward and Bernstein deep throat types, this stuff would be exposed, and people, would accept it because they saw it in television. They don't accept it when we're saying. A lot of people don't when we're saying it, but it falls apart at the slight. But because we don't have investigative journalists, instead they go after people like us. They go after the skeptics. Then the mainstream media, then they'll question, well, why are you? How come you're a conspiracy theorist? And these are people that are conspirators. This is standard operating procedure for them. This is the way they do business. They operate this way constantly. And
they're corrupt because
yes.
They gave me a plea deal, as I pointed out. First of all, I didn't lie. I had memory mistakes. I couldn't, the way they question you, it's impossible not to have memory mistakes. They have an 8-inch thick book with everything from me in it. They won't let you see it. Ask you a question, then they go to tab 42 and they say, well, Dr. Corsi, we had this memo from 2 years ago that contradicts what you just said. I said, why don't you show me that memo first? And then let's discuss. Well, we don't want you reconstructing anything. We want you remembering. This is nonsense. No one can pass that test from 2 years ago. I'm not a human tape recorder. You can punch a button and I'll give you back exact conversations and exact emails and what I was thinking in a particular date at a particular hour 2 or 3 years ago. Can't do it. Nobody can. And when they gave me the plea deal, I was supposed to go and stand in front of God and stand in front of a judge. I told you, Jesus Christ is my Lord and Savior. And I just could not bring myself to swear to God I committed a crime I didn't commit. And I said, I'm not doing it. They weren't going to necessarily sentence me for a year. In that year, if I said or did anything they didn't like, they'd have complete control over me. They could come and show up before the judge and not recommend no prison time. They could say he was a bad boy, he should get 5 years or whatever in prison. So the plea deal was meaningless. Then I said, I've got securities licenses. I'll probably go bankrupt. And they said, well, you can't tell the bankruptcy judge. You can't tell the securities and insurance regulators that you're a criminal because you've sworn to a federal judge that you committed this crime and the federal judge accepted your plea. So because it's going to be secret, it's going to be sealed. So now you've asked me to lie in front of God and a federal judge and now break regulations where my securities and insurance licenses or the bankruptcy court demand that I disclose any material circumstance that may have changed such that I shouldn't hold a securities license, etc. And you're not allowing me to fulfill that requirement. So only a criminal would give you a plea deal structured like that, requiring that you lie in order to have a chance of staying out of prison. I said, throw me in prison. If that's where the United States of America has come to, then take a guy like me, 72 years old, and throw me in prison. I'll die in prison because I'm not going to lie to save my hide.
Well, that says more about you than it does about them. That's wonderful that you have that kind of character, because a lot of people today don't have it. But well, I'm interested in just the idea that, let's say everything they're saying is true, that you're guilty of. Would you be guilty of lying about emails? I don't understand. And you'd be in prison for a year for that, for a plea with a plea bargain?
Well, I think now they're going to try to say it's also maybe obstruction of justice, that I destroyed emails. I mean, it's all, look, here's the fundamental rub. And by the way, I gave them my backup devices, which had everything in them, even if I erased emails. It was a 17-inch laptop. I was having a hard time keeping it going. Sometimes I couldn't open the mail program, and I had to find a way to erase emails in order to get the thing to open. I mean, I had 60,000 emails when I finally reloaded the computer from December 31st, 2016. 60,000 emails in the thing.
Jeez.
And who can remember 60,000 emails? At any rate, the point is, they were convinced, and this is why I wrote this book, Silent No More, so you can see the grueling nature of what they put you through and how this is really like being interrogated by the KGB or the Gestapo. I mean, it's absolutely abusive techniques that they're utilizing, even for a guy like me who came in to cooperate with them. They're treated like a criminal from day one. At any rate, they think I could have, I was going to be their great link. They were convinced that I had a contact with Julian Assange, because in July and August 2016, I took this trip to Italy. It was our 25th wedding anniversary. We've been married 27 years. It's our 25th wedding anniversary. And I'll be 28 years this year in August. And I had figured out that Assange had Podesta's emails. And I began explaining that to Roger Stone, anybody who would listen to me. And I wrote this one email where I said, word is, and it goes on and on. I explain how Assange is what has Podesta's emails. I thought because I said word is, I had to have a contact. I've come to learn over the years, I put things together. And since I was a child, my dad would say, Jerry, now when you put these things together, tell me. But you start talking about this to other people, they're going to think you're nuts, send you to a psychiatrist. I mean, in 5, 6 years old, I was realizing that oil didn't come from dinosaurs, and it was reading my dad's college books. Went and found
you and Roger both were just expressing, I don't even understand what would be wrong with those kind of emails. I would be interested in that. Who wouldn't be interested in what Julian Assange has?
But see, their theory, and remember, this is an investigation. Usual legitimate criminal investigations start with a crime. I mean, first of all, you got to have a body. It's not enough that somebody was suspected of being murdered. If they don't have a body, they don't have murder. Got to have a body. Okay, then you begin to get suspects, and you investigate the suspects until you can find one who, you have probable cause to believe may have committed the crime. And when you get that to the standard of beyond a reasonable doubt, you can indict them and bring them to a trial and try to prove that. Well, Mueller doesn't operate that way. Mueller doesn't have a crime. They've invented a crime, collusion with Russia. But he's got somebody he knows to be guilty, namely Donald Trump, whom he wants to charge with treason and impeach and remove from office. So he's got no crime, but he's got a guilty party. And he only wants evidence from you or me that fit into his predetermined theory. So I've got to fit the box which connects Roger Stone to Julian Assange so that Mueller can go Roger Stone, Jerry Corsi, Julian Assange, and then Roger Stone talks to Steve Bannon, who talks to Trump, and now he's got his coordination. So Julian Assange is told how to drop these emails so as to most damage the Trump campaign or the Hillary Clinton campaign. It's all nonsense.
And what about people like, I've admired Julian Assange for a long time. Does that make me some kind of a collaborator? I don't understand this. Again, they don't care what Julian Assange disclosed. All they care about is who released this information, not what the information is.
And that the preposterous theory that Donald Trump was coordinating the release of that information so as to be first had organized the stealing of the emails with Russia, and then given them to Assange so that he could coordinate their dropping into the public as to be most damaging to Hillary. That's the theory. Now, it's got several problems to it. Number one, Assange says that Russia did not give him the emails. And I think there's good forensic reason to believe that Assange is right, that the emails were, in the case of the DNC email server, were stolen from an inside job. And secondly, the idea that there was this coordination where I was communicating with Assange and getting Roger to communicate with Assange, so Roger could tell Assange when to drop the emails. I mean, look at some hypotheticals. This didn't happen. I mean, I never went to so let's say I go to London, and Joseph Farah sent me an email and said, "Why isn't anybody going to London?" I said, "Joseph, send me an airplane ticket. I'll go see Assange." I knew I could without committing a crime. I wrote my dissertation at Harvard on the Pentagon Papers case. My dissertation was 1972. That case, New York Times v. U.S., was 1971. And it was clear that the two newspapers, Washington Post and New York Times, had the right under the First Amendment to publish the Pentagon Papers, which was a stolen, classified Pentagon analysis of the Vietnam War, even though the analysis was stolen and classified, as long as the two newspapers didn't steal it. So I could go talk to Assange under those principles. But I didn't. You're on the hypotheticals. Okay, here I go to London. Let's just say, and I didn't do this, but so I ring the doorbell and I say, "Can Julian Assange come out and play?" The Ecuadorian embassy. So, Dr. Corsi, this is an embassy. You can't just show up. You got to get diplomatic clearance. Okay, so I go get diplomatic clearance. And now the next hypothetical is I come back and Julian Assange agrees to see me and they let me in, which didn't happen. And I say, Julian, I'm here. I'm Jerome Corsi. What have you got? Why don't you tell me what you're going to drop next? And let me have a few of them. Then that way I can scoop you. And I can publish them before you do. Well, Julian Assange isn't going to do that. July 22nd, 2016, he dropped 40,000 emails on Debbie Wasserman Schultz. And he said subsequent to that, it got more. Well, he didn't tell anybody what the others were. He hinted at it, but he would never say. Now, I figured it out because I had a source who had given me excellent information understanding how the Democrats put together their computer systems going back to about the year 2000. And I understood when I looked at the emails dropped on Debbie Wasserman Schultz on July 22nd, 2016 by Assange, those 40,000 emails came out of the DNC email server, which was dnc.org. And I did my forensic analysis and realized, who sent the emails to whom. About 9 or 10 officials in the DNC sent about 90% of those emails, and John Podesta was missing. Well, whoever got into that server had to see John Podesta's emails because he was communicating with the DNC officials. And that would have been the mother lode. I've studied John Podesta for about 10 years. He was the intellectual, his Center for American Progress was the intellectual background to the Democrats. And I knew the missing emails, Podesta's, were likely what Assange had next.
I hate to interrupt you. We're going to pick this up on the other side. We're going to a commercial break. We'll be right back in a couple of minutes with Dr. Jerome Corsi.
Photograph was taken as you waved a piece of paper in the air.
We are TFR.
My faith in destiny is all I need to prevail.
Truth Frequency Radio.
I'm sick and tired of hearing things from uptight, short-sighted, narrow-minded hypocritics. All I want is the truth. Just give me some truth. I've had enough of reading things by neurotic, psychotic, pig-headed politicians. All I want is the truth. Just give me some truth. No short-head, yellow-bellied son of tricky dick is gonna mother Hubbard's off so meager, just a pocket full of hope. Money for dough. Money for road.
And welcome back to I Protest. This is Don Jeffries. We're talking with Dr. Jerome Corsi. Dr. Corsi, one thing when we talk about this entire Mueller-Assange thing, what I've never understood is American leadership is so hypocritical on so many things. But the idea that we would actually, and I've heard it said that, Vladimir Putin was rooting for Trump or something, as if another leader doesn't allowed to have a rooting interest in an election. And the idea that with what our CIA has done in elections all over the world, going back to Mossadegh, at least in Iran, back in 1951 or whatever, 1954 or whatever it was, how can we possibly, with a straight face, sit there and lecture of Vladimir Putin or even a citizen like Julian Assange, as if when we have engineered, overthrown, assassinated leaders for decades?
Well, Barack Obama sent a whole set of his operatives who'd helped him get elected president in 2008 and 2012 over to Israel to try to defeat Netanyahu. Funded them and sent them over there. And, that's a direct attempt to intervene into an election. There's many other examples of it. I mean, why doesn't Mueller just indict Putin? Let's quit messing around. Just indict Putin.
Yeah. Well,
if they were interfering in our election, indict another Russian who's never going to come to stand trial. Indict Putin.
Exactly. Well, yeah. It's but the idea that I just think that's the height of hypocrisy. But I wanted to talk to you a little bit about our friend Donald Trump. Obviously, you can't talk about politics without he's in the center of everything. But what I'm so disappointed recently, and I'd like to know what you think of that. One thing I've criticized Trump on more than anything is I really don't understand. I've never seen anything like it, where he is literally a lone wolf in that White House. He is one appointment after another is a neocon, often never Trumper. And now he's appointed William Barr as Attorney General, who we're told from no less than Lindsey Graham is Mueller's best friend. Now, how is he supposed to oversee the investigation of Mueller? I don't get that.
Well, I mean, Donald Trump, first of all, is starting out at a tremendous disadvantage in that he's always run his organizations with a very small number of people. And he doesn't have these vast contacts in Washington, which gives him years and years and networks of these establishment figures who can come in and play roles in his administration. And secondly, over the recent years, back to Eisenhower, the establishment in Washington has largely taken over this educated think tank class that goes in and out of corporate boards, in and out of the military-industrial complex, in and out of law firms, and are ready and available to populate the bureaucracy for any administration, who essentially show why the Republicans and Democrats in Washington it's the same party, just two wings of the same party. I mean, I think today the hard left of the Democrats have now just decided to go openly socialist or communist. But certainly in John Kennedy's era, John Kennedy would be considered a more true liberal,
Yes.
more of a conservative tax cutter, wanted to end regulations, was very hesitant about defining all these new rights for various classes of people. I mean, Bobby Kennedy was more enthusiastic about the civil rights movement than Jack was. Jack did embrace it ultimately, but it was the Republicans who first introduced the civil rights laws back to Eisenhower, and the Democrats who, back to slavery, were the segregationists. And these are the things. People don't study politics anymore. They don't understand history. But the establishment class in D.C. has become what I call the deep state. And they're globalists. They really don't believe in nation states any longer. They have all bought this one world government, one world currency vision, which I think is completely bankrupt and unlikely to ever succeed. And I think in human history, there's good reason for having individual nation states and good reasons for not having everything being under one world order. This idea that we can run a perfect one world government is predicated on getting rid of God and assuming that we're not fallen human beings.
And you can't even get you can barely have contact with your local school board representative. Imagine what kind of representation you would have with a world representative or whatever that would be.
Donald Trump has always, and I've known Donald Trump back to when I had a career for 25 years in financial services, including internationally. And I about lived in the Plaza Hotel for many years when Donald Trump owned it. So I would characterize our relationship more as an acquaintance. I mean, he was the owner of the hotel. I was a VIP guest. Spent a lot of money there with staying as a corporate occupant of the hotel. And I did that for many years. And Donald Trump would run into me in business settings in New York City. Questioned me 4 times, I believe it was in 2011, about the birth certificate. But we're not social buddies. We don't see each other. I don't, call Donald Trump. I don't have his emails and his cell phone. We're not in touch. I wasn't part of his campaign. I've observed Donald Trump from a distance, even though I have spoken with him and have known him. During the campaign, I saw him once in Trump Tower, and he made a quip going into the elevator. I was standing there with Ted Malloch, trying to get Ted Malloch in to see the campaign, and Ted wanted to work as a policy advisor for Donald Trump. It never happened. And Donald Trump looked at the two of us and said, "Now there's trouble. Those two are trouble." And he got into the elevator. He has good wit about him.
Yeah.
And he recognizes me and the like, but it's not like he knows me in any deep fashion. And that's and I don't claim to be a friend or a deep acquaintance. It's a casual, professional acquaintance is how I would characterize our relationship, and very casual, very occasional. But I've watched Donald Trump in many years, including in New York. I've spent much of my adult life in New York City, and from the very first Donald Trump came on the scene, he had the characteristic, and I said he always looks like he's going to lose until just before he wins. And he does. He always looks like it's in chaos. He always looks like the deal is going to fail. But it's Donald Trump who walks away from Atlantic City with money in his pocket when the casinos were failing. It's Donald Trump who pulled out the Commodore Hotel deal, his first big deal in New York, by getting Hyatt to buy into it, and ultimately getting the Commodore Hotel was owned by Grand Central, the Penn Railroad, and Pennsylvania Railroad also owned these rail yards on the west side of Manhattan that Mayor Lindsay, going back that far, had wanted for the Javits Convention Center, and Trump got the rights to those rail yards wrapped into the Commodore Plaza Hotel. I thought it was a brilliant move at the time, and that's what swung the banks to support Donald Trump. They were going to abandon Donald Trump. They were going to let him crash and burn.
Well, I certainly hope he has something up his sleeve for America, because he invigorated so many, and I think and Bernie Sanders tapped into it as well. There's a lot of populist sentiment out there on both the left and the right. Now they both tapped into different elements of it, but when Trump talked about putting America first, I mean, I'm 62, so my entire lifetime has been spent with this globalist nonsense and this road. We have not touched the infrastructure since the Eisenhower years. You mentioned Eisenhower. So to say we're crumbling, literally crumbling, and Trump pointed this out. He said the same things I've been saying in private settings forever about what a joke America's becoming. We're starting to look like a third world nation. He talked about immigration, again, since the disastrous 86 Reform Act. We have just been fighting this absurd national suicide as far as immigration is. So but he's encountering such intense opposition, and that's why my question about who's around him. John F. Kennedy had Bobby Kennedy, and he had his Irish Mafia. Every other president, Jimmy Carter had the Georgia Mafia, has some kind of, Nixon had Haldeman and Ehrlichman maybe, that are close to them, that they can talk to, that they know they're going to support them no matter what. I don't see, even Trump's own daughter doesn't appear to support him most of the time. I other than Donald Trump Jr. and Eric Trump, who aren't in the administration, and people like you that are out there, I don't understand why he doesn't name a Paul Craig Roberts or Roger Stone or a Jerome Corsi to some kind of position there, so he has some friendly faces around him, because I think he's besieged with this neocon establishment stuff so much that he's really fighting alone in there.
Well, I think Donald Trump is best when he fights alone, even when he's had organizations. I mean, Michael Cohen, anybody who thinks Michael Cohen was a major player in Donald Trump's world doesn't understand it. Michael Cohen was a public face who could take some abuse and do kind of low-level legal work for Trump, and was a player in the organizational structure, but never, when Donald Trump had a big deal going, he had a lot of outside lawyers, and he had the best legal talent he could find in New York to do the deal. But the point is, look, the Democratic Party has largely become a communist party, but it's a communist party that has made an alliance with the military-industrial complex.
Yes.
And they want wars all over the place. And
yes.
they want, and they, since 1970, the Democrats were in love with Russia. The moment the wall fell and Russia abandoned communism, the Democrats started hating Russia.
Yes.
Because it disproved their fundamental premise, which is that socialism, communism works. And Russia was a main refutation of that. So the Democrats now want to go to war with Russia. They love these wars. You take a look at Obama. He was at war. He expanded the war in the Middle East, and he constantly expanded the war. He went into Libya. He was blowing up all of Africa with this Arab Spring nonsense. And who was producing the munitions? Who was supplying all the, Wall Street, all the munitions companies, Lockheed, all these others, were solidly becoming Democratic, because the Democrats, like Eisenhower had warned, were more aggressive. And during the 60s, McGovern and others have been the anti-war movement. Well, that's not the case in the Democratic Party any longer. No. Now, the Antifa movement and these other dupes think that they're opposing fascism, they're ushering it in. They are the vanguard of what will be a Maoist revolution, cultural revolution, in which, if you don't believe in the identity politics, the LGBT and other agendas, you're going to be considered a thought criminal in a George Orwell sense, 1984, and you'll be criminalized. It'll not, the Bible will certainly be banned because it has provisions in it which teach that marriage is a sacrament between one man and one woman. And this is not what the hard left wants taught. And that's not what they want accepted. They want all these LGBT variations to the infinite and add a few beyond infinite. And they, because somebody decides they are, have the same rights as someone does in, the civil rights movement. Well, race as a characteristic was truly, I think, it's like eye color. It's arbitrary, and it certainly does not justify discrimination. But all these various,
Yes.
the public supporting sex change operations, the sex reversal change operations, and then reversing the reversal, and how many times is that iteration going to go on? Yeah. And take a look at Los Angeles or San Francisco or what's now going to become New York, when you say free medical care here, free this, free that, and you've got tent city and drugs all over the place and needles feces all over the sidewalks.
Yeah.
This is the democratic utopia.
And we're looking more and more like a third world nation. All those things you described, unfortunately, and the more third world people from third world countries we import, again, it's hard. Someone said, I read today, that you can't have a first world nation when you have a third world population, and that's what we're building basically. And combined with the dumbing down of Americans, I've been reading that I think it's the average IQ of Americans has dropped 7 percentage points every 10 years or so. It's just amazing how dumb we're becoming as a nation. So, but you're right about the left, and that's nominally where I should be. I'm more of a classical liberal populist, but I cannot stand the authoritarian, because they're so authoritarian, and they want to ban. They don't not only want to ban speech that offends them, and they get offended all the time. They want to throw people in jail for speech.
Well, I've always looked at you, Don Moore, as a traditional liberal in the classic sense of, Locke, Hobbes, Hume, the philosophers who were largely building the intellectual basis, John Stuart Mill, who were building the intellectual basis for the founding fathers and the Constitution. And they derived a lot of their values from the Christian Judeo tradition, which, comes out of the Bible. And this whole idea of rights, which was, I think the ancient idea of natural law, natural rights, which I think the mistake that the classical liberals made was to think that the state could confer rights, when in fact the rights derived from God. But even our founding fathers corrected that and went back to inalienable rights given from God. That certainly doesn't come out of Hobbes or Locke or Hume, all of whom believe the state created the rights. But at any rate, a fundamental change, if we want to talk political philosophy, was, when I was at Harvard in the 60s, and I had done a lot of work, I had my doctoral dissertation on what the most to the left I could find and the most to the right. I was Michael Walzer, who was a classic socialist looking at issues of just and unjust war, and very brilliantly so. And on the right, I had Arthur Sutherland Jr., who was the historian of the Harvard Law School. I was his last doctoral student, and he clerked for Oliver Wendell Holmes, I believe. And at that time at Harvard, John Rawls was proposing this theory of justice as fairness. Well, that was the beginning of the intellectual movement towards this social justice, which is an undermining concept, because in classical political philosophy, going back to Plato, justice had to do more with things that are useful. I can remember Sutherland said at the end of my dissertation exam, they gave me the highest grade they could give at Harvard on the dissertation, and Sutherland said, he's my last. He had terminal cancer when we did the doctoral examination, And he said this guy is going to be useful. Well, in Plato's Republic, there's a discussion of what is justice. That's the core issue of the book, of the dialogue. And Socrates argues that justice has to do with things that are useful. In other words, you can't put a hole in the bottom of the boat and expect it to sail. So things that are useful turn out to be what we consider really just, that they are in accordance with natural law. And fairness is outside that bounds, because just is not fair. You know, we're not born with the same characteristics or abilities or talents as everybody else or anybody else. And it doesn't, that's justice, that you're born with your unique capabilities, because that's within natural law. But it's not fair. And the social justice that we've got to have everything be fair, and that the Marxist version of U.S. history, which views us as evil because we had slavery, the world had slavery. The world's had slavery. The world still has slavery.
We have 40 million slaves in the world today, including 10 million in India. Where's the boycott demanding of India?
The unique feature of the American experience was that Abraham Lincoln realized and did not fight the Civil War to eliminate slavery. He fought to save the Union. But as the Civil War evolved, Lincoln realized he had an opportunity to address what was seen as a fundamental flaw of the original Constitution, which was that the Founding Fathers left slavery in the Constitution because they didn't want to tackle that issue. Well, it was going to be tackled, and that led to the Civil War, directly or indirectly. And Lincoln, by the end of the Civil War, the Emancipation Proclamation, he freed the slaves in the South. Well, the North didn't control the slaves in the South at the time, and so it was a very clever political statement, where the 13th Amendment was really the defining end of the Civil War, freeing slaves. And of course, if you watch Spielberg's movie, you're not told that all the heroes, including Lincoln, are Republicans, and all the people who are segregationists are Democrats. That's not made clear in the movie, because they wanted to make an idea that Obama was the Abraham Lincoln of the day, which was, another very far stretch.
Yeah. Well, and you've written, obviously, you were one of the, and I people still talk about you're a birther and all that stuff. Look, as I wrote in Hidden History, I mean, all you need to know is the guy had at least 5 different Social Security numbers, if not 7. I don't know anybody outside of the world of intelligence or crime that has a need for multiple Social Security numbers.
Well, Don, it's very simple for me on the whole birth certificate issue. I say, just show me the original 1961 birth records of Barack Obama, and it'll settle the issue. I was with Sheriff Arpaio's cold case posse, Mike Zulu, twice in Hawaii trying to research this. And I was in Hawaii the day that law enforcement group, Mike Zulu, got thrown out of the Hawaii Department of Health because they asked to see the original 61 documents. What was released was a computer printout in 2011 from the White House that didn't exist in 1961, and I actually was given in Hawaii a birth certificate of the same era, which turned out to be the birth certificate from which Obama's was forged, because the characters in the fields matched identically onto Obama's, and a forensic analysis done by Sheriff Arpaio's cold case posse proved that document was a forgery, the one released by the White House. So I just want to see the original 61 documents, and that'll settle the question. And I don't know where Obama was born. I have no clue.
Yeah, we don't. All we know is that there are lots of questions about his background. And Donald Trump first came to my attention as a potential conspiracy theorist, whatever you call him, when he tweeted out. I don't know. I'm sure you remember this, that the individual, the woman who released the birth certificate or whatever, died in a plane crash and was the only fatality. And Donald Trump tweeted out about it, very strange. And I said, wow, this guy really is, because that was very strange.
That was when Trump, I think he called me 4 times when I had written when I wrote Where's the Birth Certificate? And those were the only 4 really serious conversations we had. And they were about a half an hour each. He was asking questions about the birth certificate. And, of course, when the White House produced that long form, Trump decided to give up the argument. I persisted. And I still am asking to see the original birth materials. I don't think they exist. And if they exist, there's something wrong with them that the Hawaii Department refuses to show them. Hawaii had a lot of procedures where people could even get birth announcements in the newspaper for people who weren't born in Hawaii. There were outlying offices where you could register
many
those
of his
births.
school records are still being withheld, and I don't believe that's been the case with other presidents.
There's a lot of records about Barack Obama that have been withheld, and John Brennan, private security firm, in 2008 went in and sanitized all of Obama's passport records. They were stolen by Brennan's group with a group of other passport records, but it was clear they were after Obama's. Of course, Brennan then ends up being national security advisor in the White House for Obama and heading the CIA. The whole thing reeks of a CIA legend, Barack Obama's life story. And for anybody with an intelligence background or analyzing intelligence, I've never worked for the government. I've never held a government job. But then I did a lot of university contracts back when I was an undergraduate and graduate school. Lindbergh Center for the Study of Violence, for instance, when I was at Harvard, where I did contract work. And that's where I, in fact, did the first work bird dogging John Kerry and the Vietnam veterans against the war in the early 70s. I had known John O'Neill since we were 17 years old. In college intercollegiate debate, when he was at Annapolis, I was at Case Western Reserve. We debated against each other, but I had eczema. They wouldn't take me into Vietnam. I did this intelligence work on Kerry under contract from the Lindbergh Center for the Study of Violence. And when it came around, Kerry was going to run for president, I contacted John O'Neill and said, why don't we get together? And I had written books I was able to put together on Fit for Command, which John co-authored. John was the hero of that story because he commanded Kerry's boat when Kerry left Vietnam. But I've had this background, and I could recognize within Obama that from the first time he came on the scene that he had been trained by communists, Frank Marshall Davis, that his grandparents and mother had, ties to intelligence agencies.
And how about Andrew Breitbart drops dead literally the day after he says he's going to blow the lid off Obama's days at Harvard.
And, all the things in Columbia. I mean, I had records that were given to me by some of the college records board groups that said Obama was there for only 1 year. Yeah. And then once I got the record, they changed them to say he was there for 2 years. There's too much about Obama's background that is unprovable or unknown.
Yeah. And it's never wrong to ask questions. We have a little over a minute left. Is there something especially you want to talk about or promote?
Well, I want you to get, people should get the audio book for Silent No More, which is my narrating 9.5 hours, this story. It's in iTunes and it's on Amazon.com, Silent No More, how I became a political prisoner to Mueller's witch hunt. And Corsi Nation, CORSI Nation.com is my website. That's where my legal defense fund is. It's very expensive to fight Mueller, and they tend to want you to go bankrupt. And so I need all the help I can get. I sued Mueller for $350 million, but I haven't collected it yet. And it's going to be very expensive to do that suit and to fight them when they're still investigating me. And I look at this as a fight to the end, and I intend not to give up fighting, and I could use all the help I can get.
Well, I hope my listeners will help you. Dr. Jerome Corsi, great admirer of yours. Keep up the great work. This is a tremendous injustice, and hopefully justice will prevail here. We'll be right back, and hope to talk to you again sometime, Dr. Corsi, back on the show. We'll be right back with our second hour.
Censorship and regulation is becoming an ever-growing.
This is the Truth Frequency Radio Network.
We are TFR.
Truth Frequency Radio.
Back
and welcome back to I Protest. This is Don Jeffries. My guest this hour will be Dustin Nemos. He is a freedom maximalist, a voluntarist. He's one of the foremost experts out there on the QAnon phenomenon, and his popularity is growing. He's one of a strong young voice out there for freedom and liberty and for alternative viewpoints. So I'm proud to have him on the show. Welcome, Dustin.
Hey, Don. How you doing, man?
Well, love to talk to you. I don't know if you got a chance to listen to the interview with Dr. Corsi, but so that was wonderful talking about that and the absurd Russian investigation. But let's and we're going to talk later too about Dustin has some fantastic natural products which I am starting to use, and I'm going to be promoting them on the show. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Something sure. I'm not used to that, but I tell you, folks out there, the last thing I am is some kind of a corporate sellout. So I'm not going to promote something unless I believe it. And probably, and I think you'll find that on most of these shows, is that you'll find that most what's being advertised is some kind of natural supplements, natural vitamins, things like that, because all of us recognize how disastrous the medical industrial complex is out there, how bad big pharma is. We're trying to keep healthy, we're trying to take care of our own lives, and these kind of products can help you do that and keep you healthier. So obviously that's a good thing. So I believe in them very strongly. So we'll talk more about that later. But what's new on the political? How is I guess we should ask what's new in the Q world for those of you out there. And I'm no expert on Q. I learned a lot about him from you and your listeners and your comments, and from SGT Report and their comments. But are people beginning to lose faith in that? Do they think? Because I got to tell you, this week I was very disappointed, and Jerome Corsi didn't feel as look at it the same way I did. But I really don't understand why you would name somebody like William Barr, who is, according to Lindsey Graham, no less, is the best friend of Robert Mueller. And
yeah.
What do you? I mean, how is that? I don't understand that. To me, it looks like a dog and pony show.
Well, no one's a bigger cheerleader for Trump and Q than I am. I even was kind of weirded out by that. I think maybe there's more afoot here or something. I don't think they're just going to hand it all over to Mueller's best friend for many years, if not decades. So, I don't know how that's going to play out just yet. I know Q has been focusing a lot on Ginsburg, and maybe that's just an opportunity because she's very sick right now and could be out of the game soon. And I don't necessarily think that was a timing thing on his thing. I think, he didn't know in advance that she would be sick. It's more of like, well, when she's ready, it's not going to be that long. We'll run this particular operation. So I do, in the Q thing, I do sort of have this suspense right now. I feel like big things are right around the corner. Obviously, with January now, we have some of the executive order stuff is now kind of officially allowable. It's kind of went into effect. So a lot of things are afoot. Gitmo has a lot of activity right now, too. So, there is some definite interesting things coming out of the Q movement, whether you believe or don't believe in Q or whatever. He does bring up good topics.
Oh, definitely. What is the take? What is Q? And again, I admit I'm not reading these things all the time. Usually, I will look at your channel or SGT Report or something, or maybe some conspiracy forum that might be talking about it. But what is his take on, or his or they? Whether Q is an individual or plural or group.
It's way too much for one.
Yeah. So what is the Q take on Trump's speech the other night? And a lot of people were disappointed that he didn't declare a national emergency, and then. Obviously, the Barr appointment, and today I was very disappointed again. I mean, I go back and forth on Trump so much because I just call he issued this tweet, and I know he does so much of his policies, which isn't really policy, through tweets, but that's usually where he's at his best. But he tweeted out something about the H-1B visa program, which is very near to my heart, coming from the IT industry and seeing how it devastated that industry. And he promised to abolish it, and now he seemed to be really opening up the door and saying, "You will love the fact we're going to open up a path to citizenship for it." So, is Q talking about all that stuff, or what is the latest pronouncements from Q? What are they concentrating on?
Well, Ginsburg and some of the tactics between deep state versus Senate right now, kind of pointing out some of the shifts. The MSM, for example, they'll completely avoid anything good that Trump has done, and it's just at this point sort of an established pattern. even just in the last few months, they've got a shifting pattern to them. So Q has been focusing on that. I don't know when it's going to hit. He's just posted some new things today, including big booms that I haven't even gone through yet, because I like to do them live, or at least record them and read it for the first time. So
Sure.
I don't want to spoil it yet.
Sure.
But for the past few days, I mean, he's really hit Ginsburg harder than anything, I think. And he's pointed out some things in her history that's pretty sour, pretty dark stuff. I wouldn't necessarily want to support. And she, she's been there for a long time, and it seems like her ideology has had a huge influence on some of the people today, such as some of the, this movement to destroy the different genders and the differences between sexes and that kind of thing.
Well, so does Q address the bar? Has he addressed, or have Q, plural, whatever, address the bar appointment and how that plays into him being close to Mueller?
Unless it was in there today, I don't think so yet.
Now,
he will, though. I mean, that's definitely something that, I mean, Trump has been surrounding himself with swamp creatures all along.
Yes.
He's still getting things done, and I understand to some degree of keep your enemies close. Close, but we all definitely hate to see him surrounded by the bad guys. I don't know, in this sort of court intrigue, who's got, the goods on who, and maybe Trump can play some of the bad guys because he gets the goods on them. I don't know.
Well, Jerome Corsi was saying earlier that he said, Trump, as long as he's known him, he works better when he's alone. I mean, I guess that's, I'm not saying that's not possible. I just never seen anything like it, because I don't. Everybody, like I said, Kennedy had his Irish mafia, Carter had his Georgia mafia. All other presidents had at least a trusted advisor or two. I expected to see somebody that Trump had been really tight with in the business world, and maybe that's the way he did business. And Jerome Corsi's right that he never had those kind of confidants. But I think you need that, because I think he's surrounded, like you said, by these swamp creatures and the people that largely opposed him. And I think you need somebody, to stand, if he can still talk, and attempt to do something good for the country when he's surrounded by these awful people, then he is another George Washington. If he can do that, because he is definitely a lone wolf. As far as I can see, there's nobody in the White House that's close to him at all that really was a supporter of his.
Yeah, and what he's doing is a very nuanced game of power. I mean, if you were to watch a show like Game of Thrones or something like that, you're not far off. I mean, get rid of the dragons and the crazy stuff, but that kind of willingness to stab even your best friend in the back for that sort of political power. I mean, Trump has lived in that world in New York. He's familiar with it. I mean, he's got friends that have lived in that world as well. He understands how to play in that world. So I'm not afraid of him or afraid for him necessarily. But it is still kind of disconcerting to see the bad guys put into power. But we do still have so much good fruit of the Trump tree. So I don't think he's in there to swindle us. I think he is getting results done. He's just using bad guys that maybe he can control because he has the dirt on them. Well,
I mean, if you take a look at like somebody like Pence, who is the the heir to the throne, who's standing there. I mean, you can just. He would fit in any kind of Shakespearean drama or Game of Thrones or anything like that. I mean, the guy doesn't support Trump whatsoever. In fact, what's been forgotten is a while back. Remember that secret insider that published? Was it the New York Times published a big? And lots of people think that was Pence. I mean,
he denied it, but a lot of people thought it was.
Well, who did Q think? Did they speculate on that? Who they thought was the person?
They talked about it. They didn't speculate on who it was. More of like catching the leaker, that kind of thing.
Well, I think it could have been so many people, because there are so many people in there that qualify for that. But
half the government hates him at this point. We know that there are people in there doing it. All that was confirmation that we were right all along, that there is a plot.
Well, there's certainly, and I've never seen anything like it. I mean, Jerome Corsi is here battling to his own legal battle. He talked openly about it, and I I don't understand this. We talked, they're talking about his emails and Roger Stone emails, and Hillary Clinton had an email problem herself, I seem to remember, and nothing happened there. So, I mean, the idea that these deep state criminals like the Clintons and so many others, the Podestas, and just what was revealed in their just, really diabolical emails with all the references to pizza and pasta, and, how that seems to play into the whole...
you compare those emails to any of their art tastes, and you are convinced.
There's a lot of smoke there, but nobody's interested in that, and you're crazy to talk about it. But then you have people like Jerome Corsi and Roger Stone who are threatened legally for nothing. I told him, I said, even if everything they say is true about that you I don't know, that you shared emails with Julian Assange, who is a private citizen and a whistleblower, and I think a hero. There should be considered a hero, but I don't understand it. And Trump has... his personality has divided the country like I've never seen it. So many people have lost their heads over him. So many good people on the left, I thought. But it's just...
Well, the right has shifted from passively receding territory to holding firm on some things now. And that's a big shift for this sort of Marxist slow creep. Yeah.
Well, Trump is the first, I guess, proactive leader. You're right. He's the first...
he hits back.
Yeah, in that, not only that, he leads. I mean, the right, you could say they don't even counterpunch half the time, but they certainly don't.
Yeah, he leads from a moral authority perspective. I mean, he's definitely got the moral high ground, but he does that, but he can still punch back from his bully pulpit. So it's a beautiful combo.
Yeah, and I guess that I call it like I say it with Trump when he does things that I agree with, like the Trump-Putin summit. I love that. I thought that was great. When he initially was going to pull troops out of Syria, said it was wonderful. But you have people, like Noam Chomsky, who's supposed to be the darling of the anti-war liberals. He's saying, no, we can't do that. It's like, what?
Noam has really switched on some issues. I agreed with a lot of his earlier talks about free speech and respecting those rights of others, but I don't know why he just suddenly flaked on Syria again. This is a strange thing, and I'm sure there's more to it. Obviously, a lot of his cabinet are pushing really hard to stay in Syria. Wow. He said we're getting out, and then he started to make real moves to do it, and he's tried to do this before. He seems like he really wants to. Apparently, they've somehow managed to convince him to not do it for now, so that's good enough for me for a while.
Yeah, well, it's one of the most, I think the dangerous points from an establishment perspective of what Trump was, his rhetoric. So much of his campaign rhetoric. In fact, he tweeted out, this is what I campaigned on to stop these endless wars. And I'm glad I remember that because I wanted to hear that. But I mean, but when he excited people like me when he talked about, hey, we've spent all these trillions on these senseless wars. We need to bring the troops home. We do need to bring the troops home, close the bases, and hey, use the troops at the border. That's one place you could use them, where we've been invaded. So, but I think on that and on immigration. So, what do you think he's getting accomplished there?
I think Trump understands more than anything else the pulse of the popular thought with people. And I think he understands where that is, and he understands how to generate real energy toward getting real change in the world. And, that to some degree requires being a little bit Machiavellian, a little bit manipulative in terms of, like for a long time there, first year, he wouldn't even address people getting their heads smashed in by Antifa, wouldn't even bring it up. People were like, where's the support, Trump? We're out here fighting for you. Why aren't you helping us? Well, that generated a lot of energy, whether, there's victims there for sure. There's a price to pay, but that generated a lot of energy. People are afraid of Antifa now. They don't want to go to these things. They show up in armor now because Antifa will hurt you. So these kind of things build energy that he can use to get things done. So maybe that's why he hasn't just went ahead and built the wall. Maybe that's why he hasn't just went ahead and done what he wants. He's building that kind of energy and that kind of support. And I think any leader needs that.
I think that he would take heart from it. I would love to. I'm very interested in what's going on in France with the Yellow Jacket movement, and I'm amazed that you see, because it looks to be legitimate on the surface. And and what's one of the things they're upset about, other than the migrant problem, which is nothing compared with the illegal immigrant problem we have, but is the fact that they're raising the retirement age from 60 to 62 over there. So they have less tolerance for tyranny than present-day Americans do. When I don't see any indication that most Americans are willing to go out and do what the French are doing. going. Because I think, unfortunately, it may come to that, because you see what happened as soon as they went out there. Macron, although they seem to be fighting back, but Macron backed down, and they really, the bully, gave the lunch money back.
Well, he did. Now he's trying to bring out the military, and I think just like, or at least some public officials now are encouraging you to just use live ammunition and fire into crowds. So it's getting kind of crazy over there. The yellow vest movement is spreading to North America, mainly in Canada so far. But, they're also just signing away their sovereignty to Brussels and their borders to, endless immigration. We haven't done that yet. So that's why they turned out. And I think, kind of to your point, if Trump was to do something big for we in the truther movement, his base would swell with a lot of that energy I talked about overnight. We're ready for that, and we would support a big move at this point. So whenever he is ready to do something, there's a wave of us, an endless ocean of us out there. The silent majority is ready. I mean, the energy is built up. I think things are coming to that critical mass right now.
Well, unfortunately, it may be necessary. And I'm not calling for any, a violent revolution, but you can see what's happening in France. Is they're just power in numbers. Because apparently our representatives are not going to learn any other way, because we keep reelecting them if the elections are legitimate, which they probably aren't. But anyway, you look at it, when you're returning 96% of incumbents basically every election, you're giving a thumbs up to the kind of leadership you're getting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I look at Americans, and I understand that we're all the research shows that we're the average American's IQ is dropping 7 to 10 points every decade or something, and so it's bad. We are under so much attack here that it is so bad, and we are almost lost. We are almost beyond saving. So. In the education system, in the health situation, across the generations, like in many different categories, we are, even in the reproductive category, like we're not even replacing our culture. No. It's scary.
No, it is. And we recently, just this week, I read that some college, and I don't know what college was, but a college, they basically starting a program to urge people who, as a writer, I certainly resent this, that all writing classes now, that universities stop judging writing on the quality of the writing, because that's language supremacy. They're basically calling, good, as they've done before, that good grammar is racist. I mean, how do you have an educated, and it's so demeaning.
That's postmodernist thought, and I always refer people to Stefan Molyneux for that, because he's got a great grip on it. But it's our education system is so bad. I talked about this with Alex Newman from the New American. We talked about the education system, and if we don't fix that, all of the other issues that we're fighting about will be lost within a generation if we don't solve it now.
Yeah, you have to, because even as I was hearing somebody comment about it, might have been Alex Jones, I don't know who it was, but said not even third world countries have this kind of lunacy where they're purposely trying to dumb down instead of trying to lift everyone up. It's like we're trying to dumb everyone down to the lowest common denominator, and you see this in every fart-fueled comedy. The crazy, the comedies that are out there now. They're throwing up every second and that kind of stuff. People think, you're not being a prude. That, but at some point, first of all, it takes no creativity, and
there's a way to be funny without being creative.
Yes, of course. I mean, look back to SCTV, one of my favorite shows. I mean,
that's where the art comes in.
Yes, it's sophisticated, and I used to be so against censorship, and I still don't like censorship, but I think that as far as television and film, I think some of that censorship really forced these people to use their mind, because I think, unfortunately, a lot of these writers will just get lazy. And they just say, okay, let's have the character fart or throw up. And it's, it's like...
I know. And that tells you where the education system has gone, because there's a curve there. Like there's an equivalency. Like as the education system has gotten worse and worse over time, ever since, the days of Charlotte Iserby with Dumbing Down America. Now we have, phonetic spelling and not understanding the individual letters and using things like Common Core to destroy people's education. And
God, it's
just desire to learn.
It's just I don't know what they think, what good will come out of that, unless they want to, unless it's part of a conspiracy to dumb down the public education.
No, it is absolutely.
And then the elites will still get the private education, and there'll be that much of more of a disparity between education for the elites. Yeah, so
exactly, that is it entirely. Like this is one of those things. Like, there's certain things you can do to completely take over or destroy a civilization. One of those things would be to somehow mind control the leader. One of those things would be to control the education system and do exactly this for 3 generations, and we're almost there.
Yeah, I mean, it's just to see. I mean, talking to, and again, my kids are in their 20s and that generation. I can't imagine, but I mean, I remember fighting a little bit. I didn't fight enough probably, but they were already starting to discourage cursive writing. And that may seem like an antiquated thing. People don't write letters anymore, and I
can't write cursive. They didn't cover that for me very well.
So they were already doing it for you. So, and I think it's important because it's just, again, it's all part of the general. But they wasted so much time. Like they would literally study for an entire semester on various Indian teepees and things like that. It's like, what are you wasting time on this? But you're not talking about the founding fathers, and Jerome Corsi and I talked about that a little bit. The reason why Americans don't, and why Hollywood ignores the founding fathers. You've seen there's never been a biopic of George Washington or Thomas Jefferson ever in the history of Hollywood, because they don't want people to know very much about that founding, because what was the founding based on? The overthrowing of tyranny. You think people might, even with their dumbed down condition, they might look around them and go, wow, this seems a lot worse than George III.
Yeah. If you control the stories people hear, you control people. And they've got us cradle to grave.
Yeah, and it's so much propaganda, and it's very hard for someone like me who's trying to write history. I mean, my next book is coming out in May, and it's around the corner, Crimes and Cover-Ups in American Politics, 1776 and 1963. It's really hard to expose the hidden history when the vast majority of people now don't even know the official fake lying history.
Exactly. So, yeah. It is difficult, and I don't blame. I used to be really bitter, and I blamed the people for being so stupid. But now it's there's so many things that they don't even understand, like the fluoride in the water and what that would do to a child's IQ. At least 6 points right there, gone. Yeah. So there's so many things that you can do to prevent things like that for your child, or if you're having a child, like iodine can increase IQ, things like that. So there's a lot of things you can do from home to avoid a lot of the poisons or heal a lot of the damage. But and that's kind of what I do with the health side of things now, because I realize there is a war on our minds, both through propaganda, but also chemically and through our food and our diet, and just sort of all these different slow kill methods to make us sicker, dumber, more dependent.
And we have to do all we can, and that's taking that and staying away. I urge everybody. I worked for the medical industrial complex for my entire life. I was fired unfairly last year after 44 years. My entire life with them. I haven't still decided what I'm going to do about that, but I'm going to do something. I'm not going to sit by and take it. But I saw it on the inside. That may be a book down the road too, because people it's like watching the sausage being made, and it's gotten so much worse over the years. But hospitals and the medical profession are the third leading cause of death at worst. They may be even higher than that, but in America now. Now, to think you're going to professionals who are killing you at a rate that's only being beat by cancer and heart disease. And my next book will show that cancer was virtually unknown before 1900. And
these are choice diseases. We choose to have these diseases.
Yeah, these are clearly man-made and or man-created in the environment, or what we eat, what we consume, and having fluoride in the water. They still try to smear people who talk about that as conspiracy theorists, and they act as if the people who were protesting at the time were wrong. I mean, fluoride is considered a poison, has a poison symbol on it. If you see it anywhere,
it is a toxic waste. They will bring out a hazmat team to clean it up, and men in suits usually have to control it until they dump it into your water. So, there is a lot of things out there like that. And I kind of came at a lot of these topics from a real argumentative perspective, too. So I learned about debating a lot of these issues. And I have all these folders filled with things that I try to help people with, and trying to find the evidence to support these things. Because a lot of times people will try to argue these things because they heard something from a friend or they read an article, and then they get decimated by someone on the mainstream media, like a doctor who just completely big ego, went to school for 12 years and could never be wrong about anything. And they're like, you heard this on the internet. Okay, whatever. But, all information is on the internet, including the good stuff. And most doctors are idiots who don't actually keep up with the modern research.
And I'm trying to get a hold of Dr. Joel Wallach, Dead Doctors Don't Lie or whatever. And I really want that guy on the show, because that guy's got a lot of courage, and there are others out there like him. But I saw enough, like I said, in my industry. I mean, It's awful. I mean, I think they're really much like our present day police. I think they do a lot more harm than good, unfortunately. And so that's where, I would probably buy into somewhat of your voluntarist beliefs regarding especially the police forces, because I think at this point, I don't know what productive purpose they serve.
Well, no, and then they're basically a military at this point anyway. But, in terms of a lot of these different issues, I mean, there's just so much need for information. A lot of the things that I cover on my show isn't even stuff to sell, but even how to make it yourself at home, just to get people away from these doctors, because it's built into the system from the very ground up, even the education that they get, that things like cancer can only be treated with these poisons that cause cancer, like chemo and such. Can't treat anything with natural food because you can't patent food, and they're basically just pill dispensers. So I see an average medical professional as one of those little Pez dispensers from the store that kids get. So I know that's a little bit mean, and I apologize if there's any health professionals out there who are open-minded, and that's kind of rare. And there's some really great ones out there who have really had to suffer through their careers to get the word out.
Absolutely.
I've done interviews with some who have been arrested, who have been whistleblowers.
I hate to interrupt. We're coming up on a break here. We'll be right back after this break with Dustin Nemos.
No hate, no hype, no fear. We are TFR Frequency Radio.
Coming down the street, coming right down the middle. You gotta keep the beat, but there's blue as the ocean. How the sun shines down.
And welcome back to I Protest. I'm Don Jeffries. My guest this hour is Dustin Nemos. Dustin, we were talking about this medical industrial complex a little bit. Recently I posted, I'm sure you probably read the story, and I don't think for a second that this guy was an isolated aberration or anything. That the first doctor was caught, what I've suspected for a long time. He admitted that for decades, this guy had been practicing for decades, he had been giving fake diagnosis of cancer to many, many, many patients, treating them to chemotherapy and all these other deadly treatments, which I don't believe in capital punishment, but you could make a strong argument that someone like that deserves something like that. So I don't know if you heard about that or not, but I don't.
And then there was a doctor just recently that got busted for saying that if patients were Jewish, you would rather give them like drugs that weren't even their prescription to mess with them, things like that. So there is a whole lot of that within our culture.
Yeah, and people, they have, we Americans are, it's so weird the way they don't trust so-called conspiracy theorists, and they're so skeptical of people that are naysayers and are just trying to point out, hey, look at that over there, the emperor's not wearing any clothes. There's a lot of naked emperors running around our society at this point. We need those little kids to come out and point it out, I guess, but they're so trusting of the professions. They're so trusting still of doctors. They're so trusting of lawyers, these kind of things, and
it's an
teachers
IQ thing too.
Yeah,
because they have killed our IQ. They have destroyed it, and now many people are unable to even speak English properly, much less reason through these complicated issues. And the average person is so beaten down, all they can think about when they get home is like watching TV. And I completely sympathize with them, and I'm trying to find ways to get their burden lifted so that their mind is a little bit more clear and they have a little bit better health and they can save a little bit of money and maybe just kind of spread that information, and we can kind of take a chunk out of what the big pharma profit industry is doing to us.
Yeah, well, when 72% or so of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck, the ones that have jobs, you're right, we are beaten down. Some people that are lucky enough to have a job have to work 2 jobs. So we are stressed out. You come home, you got to deal with if you're a parent, you got to deal with your kids, and you have to get lost in their world and put them first if you're a good parent. So it's, whether they're dealing with homework, what's going on in school, what's going on with their peers, their activities. So it becomes very difficult to be any kind of
papers, these appeal to authority figures.
Yes, exactly, and it's the idea that but I don't, and I try to, a lot of times I just get a blank look. But when I talk about doctors or teachers or lawyers or police officers, judges, these kind of, and to me these are, for the most part, the professions that have been taken over by some pretty awful people that are doing some very bad things.
It's the Lucifer effect. Anytime you give someone power, they become evil, even if they weren't before.
Yeah, that power corrupts. Absolute power.
It's like the ring of power in Lord of the Rings. It was a metaphor for this kind of state power. Yeah,
and that's why our system, and I know as a voluntarist, you, and it's hard to argue with you at some point, because at this point, the people we've entrusted power to have proven, like most people have throughout history, incapable of handling that power responsibly and being corrupted by it. But
and we learned such a great lesson from the beginning of our nation with decentralization, right? Like, just spread that power out as much as you can. Set all the checks and balances. And that's exactly what a voluntarist wants to do. I want to create 50 different competing police agencies, so no policeman ever feels like his job is secure if he goes out and murders someone or rapes someone or does something corrupt.
Well, exactly. When we talk about and I write a lot about this, and people say, well, it's there's only a few bad ones. Well, okay, yeah. Well, first of all, I don't
covering
believe that.
For the bad ones too.
Exactly. So, but what about the police management? And this everywhere always covers up. And why don't they want to kick the bad eggs out? Because it begs the question. Obviously, they don't think that because the system is corrupt, and that's what they don't want to face. And we see this the same thing in education. And my second book that's coming out this year is Bullyocracy, which is going to be a completely different subject and talking about bullying and the social hierarchy in schools. But it will paint a picture of schools that I don't think the worst school critic could imagine. Because, and again, it's not a few bad eggs. The system covers up all the time for this and defends the bullies instead of the victims, because that's all part of the social hierarchy.
And I'm a big advocate for peaceful parenting for this exact reason, because we raise our children with authority and violence. And then this is what, we're used to, and we think this is normal. But, and I'm not bashing police or anything, but there is actually no.
Well, when you say peaceful, define peaceful parenting.
Well, not spanking, things like daycare, which I know is not even an option for some people. They just have to do it. Yes. But if avoidable, like, a young child cannot tell the difference between daycare and abandonment.
Right.
So there's something called an adverse childhood experience. And if they rack up too many of these, their life is going to be a lot worse off for it. And it can only be, there's so many things you can do to ruin a child, and only a few things you can do to help repair them. So it's good to catch that early. But we have this sort of a situation where a lot of these bullies, they go into the police force. And we have to accept at some point, no matter how right we think something is, there is never a morally defendable position to use violence to force anything on anyone, or any sort of coercion or involuntary relationship or association, unless it's in self-defense. If they're not hurting you, you cannot hurt them. And that's something that police break every single day. Or even social workers like clerks and stuff who live off taxpayer money. And this is not something that people want to accept if their livelihood depends on it.
No, and then that's not even social workers, especially in child protective services and so forth, that I've written a lot about that, and how there's every indication that a lot of these child trafficking sex rings run through foster homes and things like that.
My gosh, the statistics of kids who go through that system, like 30% or more. Yeah. It's bad.
And it's amazing. But again, people and Americans are just, we've created a society here in America, and I think it's so much because we have this massive culture fueled by this mainstream media, where you not only have films, you have television, now you have the internet, you have music. There's so much media out there for people to consume, and Americans consume more of it, I think, than anyone. And they really seem to, unfortunately, be absorbing these poisonous messages that are coming from the media more than I think. I think that's the difference between, say, us and France, maybe us and Italy or whatever, because they're not, I don't think they have the same kind of powerful media that's centered in New York and LA here. And it's almost like some Americans, I feel like they've been in a commune like the Moonies or something, and they need deprogramming.
Well, absolutely, they do. And I think we need a big economic reset, some hard times to learn some hard lessons. I mean, I think we need a lot of really tough love approach. And I think it's coming. I think there's a lot of bad things ahead that will sort of harden us and temper us as people. And I think those are going to be important lessons to learn.
Yeah, well, I would like to think that that wouldn't happen, but at this point, I'm fond of saying that Donald Trump is with all his flaws and his personality defects that turn me off quite a bit too. He's what we have at this point. I think he's the last hope for America because beyond Trump, there is no other individual in politics that has any chance of being elected. They're not going to bring Cynthia McKinney and Dennis Kucinich. Rand Paul probably realistically doesn't have a chance. Ron Paul certainly didn't. I don't think anybody that would really possibly do something good and try to right this sinking ship is ever going to have a chance to get. I mean, just look at the disasters on everybody in the Democrat, all the candidates in the Democrats, and anybody other than Trump. There's no other Trump Republican unless maybe Rand Paul, but the rest of them, Pence or any of these other people, my God, they're awful. So if he can't get it done, then I think unfortunately the collapse is inevitable.
And if he doesn't, if they get power back, then Orwell, if what we have now is nothing, we're going to have so much worse. They are going to completely stamp out all conservative voices. They're probably going to stick us in re-education centers.
Yeah, well, that's what gets me. And I was talking a little bit about Jerome Corsi because I'm a classical liberal. I'm a classical liberal populist probably hybrid. I have some libertarian in me too, but I don't understand. So I should be really more friendly with people on the left, but I end up talking to more people on the right, and I'm friendlier with them because
we won't hit you.
Yeah, exactly. They're a lot more tolerant. I've lost so many, and I've been, I think, fair to Trump. But I've never been really a cheerleader. I'm for him, but when he does something good, I say it. I support a lot of his rhetoric, and his campaign rhetoric was, I wrote very favorably when he delivered, I thought, what the best inaugural address since John F. Kennedy. I thought it was fantastic, but I've been disappointed in a lot because I don't think he's followed through. And again, I realize the obstacles he has against him. That's why I say he's working by himself. But this left we have is so intolerant now. They just want to crush all dissent. They just want to throw people in jail for exercising free speech.
Well, they were raised with authority and violence. It all goes back to that, I think, at the end of the day.
Yeah, and well, I like the peaceful parenting project, and I didn't know that it was called that, but my wife and I were peaceful parents, so
it's a little bit more work up front, but on the back end, like maybe through the teenage years and stuff, you won't get nearly as much of that like teenage hate to the parents. You'll have a bond that's established, like you were there for them, you didn't leave them to cry themselves to sleep in the crib. I know that's like common advice, but that's abandonment too. When they're young, they need to know that you're there, and then that establishes the bond for life. And then when they're older, they will rely on you. They will come to you for advice. They will do all of the good things you want a child to do.
Well, the things like the like you said, crying in the again, that's part of I think the rugged American individualism, because in Europe and all the parts around the world, the family bed has been very popular for a long time, where the kids, it's no big deal. Hey, sure, you want to come sleep with me in the bed? It's no big deal. And I think Americans have. And certainly since the entrance, and again, I'm not sounding like a misogynist here, but people don't realize the impact it had when women entered the workforce, where it's not like there was suddenly they doubled the amount of jobs. What did they do? They just started paying everybody less, because let's face it, when your wife started working, and obviously every family's income should have risen. Didn't work out that way, did it?
And to another, I mean, it's not like women weren't working before. They were doing really important things, right? They were helping and probably working twice as hard as the men were.
Oh, absolutely.
Because being a stay-at-home mom, I mean, my wife is one, and she works very, very hard, all the time. And it's the most important job of any society. It is, but then think about what happened to those children that were suddenly needed daycare or didn't have that really important bonding moment.
Latchkey kids. I mean, the latchkey kid phenomenon. When I grew up in the 60s and 70s, and I knew very few mothers that worked. And it really was a good feeling to get off that school bus and come home and have your mom greet you at the door. I mean, I don't know. I think that serves a really good purpose. And if they want to look at that and say that's, I don't know, maybe they call that racist. I don't know, in the crazy world we live in. But I think that's what a lot of when Trump was talking about making America great again, that people in that generation, and certainly back that grew up, older people like Trump that grew up in the 50s especially, I think they lived in the best economy America ever had. And they remember a time when things were really better, pretty much across the board.
At one point, America was largely a monoculture, and we had similar values. We had sort of we knew what to expect from society. We had strong family values. We had strong ties, and things were really strong in general. Multiculturalism has largely been a net loss for us, and now we have destroyed our value system. Our cultures are largely lost outside of like certain like rural areas and such. Like mountain folk, they keep their culture. But now there's this big blur, and America has like 11 different cultures or something to it. So there's a lot of balkanization and hate.
Yes, well, I think that's on purpose, because without assimilation, you can't have any. Yeah, exactly. You can't have any cohesiveness. So eventually, you have to. And we saw that with the immigration we had in the late 1800s and the early 1900s. Those groups assimilated, and they actually added something to the culture. The Italians added, the best food we could get, that kind of thing. And
they built New York. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, but they started their businesses. There were opportunities for them then. They assimilated, but they did add exciting new things like pizza and things that they brought to the world that maybe
we had that sort of like first responder advantage. Like the first movers were the ones that were really ambitious and smarter and wanted to get the hell out of there. And now we're getting all the dregs who just want the free shit. So we have to close our door.
And again, it's just a simple numbers game. Like I've said, I don't care if you're talking about gorgeous Russian supermodels or whatever you want to say. We don't need more people. We don't have jobs for the people here. It's got nothing to do with who they are, although who they are does matter, because the fact that they are limited in education and skills, and they're coming over and they're willing to work so cheaply, they're driving down the skills of America. That's why the H-1B visa program is so deadly, because these are perceived as skilled individuals. And I can tell you, having worked with people, there's nothing, again, there's nothing any different about these individuals than Americans. They aren't any more skilled or less skilled than Americans are. There's plenty of Americans that could do those jobs. They just won't do them as cheaply, and it's all about cheap labor.
As a voluntarist, there's even a rift within the community, and that rift is around the border issue. So, myself, Stefan Molyneux, and others, we're sort of taking the position of support Trump. We need a border. Although technically a voluntarist, I don't believe that we should have a government for obvious reasons of abuse and power and all of that and decentralization. So I don't necessarily believe in supporting government-enforced borders. But when we have an open society, an open flood, an open door policy like this, and a publicly enforced tax that pays for a welfare system that's drawing in, basically homeless refugees that want to mooch off of us, that is a unsustainable cultural invasion that will only lead to more government. So I'm actually against that, just as an effective way of trying to restrain the growth of government.
Yeah, and it's order out of chaos. It's divide and conquer. It's so obvious what they're doing, and it's because you already had black and white fractionalization with feminism, male-female fractionalization. You already had the generation gap between the children and their parents, again fueled by the media, basically telling their children to hate their parents. And now you have tons of different groups coming in with wildly varying cultures. I mean, you have, with Muslim groups, you have the ultimate patriarchal society where women have no rights at all, and you're bringing them into a culture where it's a matriarchal culture, which is completely run by women. And you don't think that's going to be a tremendous explosion of
Molyneux said this once, and I really like to use this quote because it covers it pretty well. And I don't know if it's original to him, but he said something along the lines of multiculturalism plus proximity equals war and conflict, basically. And there are compatible cultures. Like I think Western culture gets along pretty well with certain like European and even Eastern cultures. But there are bad cultures that are not compatible as well, like Islam. And that's not a race thing. Islam's not a race, but they use that to try to push that whole Marxist divide conquer thing.
Yeah, and those of us that are consistent here. I mean, I don't want to, inflict my culture or my values on other countries either. I don't want to. That's why I want all the troops brought home. I think it's ridiculous.
I disagree with you there. I want to take the world over. I want to take over and leave everyone alone. Just leave them alone. Yeah.
I think that, well, let's take the last 8 minutes or so, and let's talk some about, because again, I'm going to be,
the health thing,
this
right?
is not an infomercial, but I am going to be trying to sell, and I'm new to this too, so Dustin's going to lead me to how to do this, but I think we're going to come up with some kind of coupon code, and I'll probably put something on my blog about it, and maybe post on social media too, to see how people can order these very quality products and worthwhile products, necessary products, and still I can get some kind of credit for it as well. So you'll be helping out both Dustin and myself, and you'll be getting something good for yourself.
If you don't mind, actually, I'm going to take a minute or two just to talk about a little backstory.
Okay.
This affiliate program, I've been censored before. I've been shut down by YouTube and other big tech companies like Twitter, Facebook, Google, all of them. And I've struggled to keep my business as an alt media figure sustainable, to even be able to pay the bills. I'm a dad and got a baby and a wife to support and a bunch of pets. So I figured out, rather than just trying to rely on YouTube, which demonetizes everything, I could take some of the stuff that I'm already learning for myself about alternative health, and especially in terms of high quality DIY supplements that you can do at home, things that will be high impact for pennies a day. That's the kind of information that I like to share. Well, not everybody wants to make their own. So there are some really good quality products out there that I've researched that I use myself that I can refer people to. So it's a kind of a win-win, especially if they're already, buying that particular product from someone else, maybe getting a less of a deal. So then I took it a step further, because a lot of other YouTubers out there who were in the alt media, specifically just the alt media, these are the people that I know, right? They are struggling for the same reasons. So I decided, why don't I take this products thing that's keeping me floating and help other people as a win-win? Let other alt media figures use this to fund themselves, because obviously, the big guys are not going to let us do it through the usual means.
Right.
And, to that extent, I've got a couple of products. I don't have many different things, that'll change over time, but I have a few different things that are really good quality, things that people need, everybody needs, like iodine. Real quick about iodine. I mean, that's one of the most important things in the world.
And I've started taking that, a disclaimer here. So yeah, and it is necessary. And it used to be, talk about a conspiracy, it used to be in
the salt, yeah.
All the salt, yeah. And they just, why would you take that out?
Why would you take it out? Because the average IQ of the nation was going up.
Yeah.
That was the cheap stuff. So imagine if you get the really good quality stuff and you take it when you're pregnant, when you're nursing, and you build that up, because you're supposed to, according to Mercola, you double up on certain things like iodine. The baby's brain needs it. Mm-hmm. It's the difference between cretinism, which is like mental retardation, and a higher IQ baby. So this is a very important, this is a trace element the body needs that 90% or so roughly of people are deficient in, and it's linked to things like thyroid, and a lot of preppers have it sitting around in case there's ever a nuclear fallout, because it helps protect you from radiation and absorbing certain radioactive elements, kind of the worst of it, into your thyroid, which would basically burn you out for forever. So it does have a lot of uses in the prepper field. It can, I use it for my rabbits and dogs and stuff to clean their water, disinfect their water, but also for their health. So it's something that you could DIY at home. And that's something that I also sell for those who don't want to, at a really great price and a good quality. Other stuff I'm going to add, like colloidal silver, but I also have carbon 60, which I've talked to you about before.
Yes.
And this is not your typical alt health product, so I always kind of put a disclaimer up there, because this is more of a new and experimental thing. But the leading researchers on a rat study where they were trying to do a toxicity test to kill the rats, they actually did this test and ended up making the rats live to be twice their normal maximum age. So imagine a human living to be 180.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the equivalent of what these rats did. The head researcher said safe at high doses over long periods of time. There's only a few people in the world that can get this stuff right now, and I happen to be one of them. So that's a really popular product that's kind of just being heard of by so many people, and that's why it's so difficult to get, because so few people make it. And that's changing because the demand is there now. But a few YouTubers talked about it, and now it's sold out. It's just a small market.
I will probably be verbally, advertising it. I guess we're going to work something out. What do you think is the best way that for instance, like my listeners or people that want to support me, how can they order your products, and are we going to work out a coupon code, or how are we going to do this?
Actually, while I was waiting on the show, I figured out an even better method. So if you just go to apexhealth.club/Donald Jeffries,
cool.
That's your link right there.
Oh, cool. Okay.
So you can just use that, and people can, if they go there, it will track any purchase that they make, and you'll get average 25% of it, which is really good for affiliates. I set it up so that it's, long-term cookies, recurring revenue share, all of that, because I really do want to help alt media figures.
And it's a win-win, because we want to help each other, and that's one of my ideas too, Dustin. I'm thinking I'm trying to think of some kind of a nationwide group just to start something like a citizens committee against corruption or something like that, to try to get all the people I haven't met you, but there's so many I call friends now, like you and Sean from SGT Report, people like Ella Felder, who I host the radio show, co-host with her, people that I feel like I know, but they're all interested in making this country better and trying to improve things. And if we could all kind of come together and support each other, and I think the way to do it here is it is a win-win-win, because we are not selling junk. I mean, this is stuff that is really good. At the worst, you could say, okay, well, it didn't really do much. It's certainly not going to harm you, and it looks like it has great benefits. All these things do, and you can help us. We can help each other, and whoever buys it can help their body by taking them.
Yeah, I kind of, my dream and my goal of this, and I'm writing a book about this, to just give away all these different recipes and stuff that you can do at home to kind of replace the doctor. I really dream about knocking some of that profit margin of the big pharma down and getting people sort of, I have a home pharmacy, I don't need to go to the doctor, because this right here will take care of whatever I have today, and that saves me time and a visit for pennies a day probably. That's what I want to offer people, and I want to do it in a way that they can share it with their friends, maybe help their communities, their neighborhood, and spread that virally. When they get these results, they're going to spread that word of mouth.
Absolutely. I mean, and I think that this is the best thing we do. So look for that, listeners, and I'll be writing on my blog about it too, and writing on social media. And Dustin is, boy, look, your subscribers are going. I need more subscribers on my YouTube channel. You're exploding. So tell us, we have about a little over a minute left. Is there anything else you want to promote or you want to talk about especially?
Yeah, I'll give you a quick story about the Carbon 60 that's not even related to the age stuff, because there's a lot of other off benefits that the research is showing. When I first discovered it, it was a NASA scientist who was sharing a story about his mother. He experimented, right? He gave his 90-plus-year-old mother, I think she was 94 or something, had not been driving for years, hadn't even been without her glasses since she was 42 years old. Yeah. He gave her some C60, some Carbon 60, and within a few months, she got rid of her glasses and had her license back and was driving around with walking with a cane and stuff. So one of the most interesting benefits seems to be the eyes. When you protect the body, you're able to focus then on the healing aspect rather than the defense aspect. And this is the strongest antioxidant in the world, 179 times, if I'm recalling, stronger than vitamin C. So it's very powerful, protective, and it's very safe according to research available.
There's the music coming up. This went too fast. We're going to have to do it again. Dustin's become a friend, and we're going to support each other and buy us great products. Visit Dustin Nemos on YouTube. He does some great work out there. We'll be back next week with some other fine guests. And Dustin, I'll be talking to you. Thanks for being with us.
Good seeing you, Don.
Nice talking to you.